So Donald Trump is going to invade Mexico to deal with the cartels, or so he says. Now, it's important to understand that whenever you're dealing with a narcissist, you watch what they do and you don't really look at what they're saying because their true motivations will always be disguised. And so to me, when I look at what's happening in this threat to kind of invade Mexico to deal with the cartels, what I see is somebody shaking down the cartels, somebody leveraging the US military power to shake down these large multinational crime syndicates who are just dripping in money. And so I don't believe for 1 minute that Donald Trump gives one single fuck about the flow of drugs into this country. We certainly know his son doesn't. But I think, what we see is him turning the United States government into his own private little mafia. He's going to do that, like, fire everybody, replace them with loyalists, fire the generals, fire these guys. He's turning it into like The Apprentice, the American government edition. And we should all be very scared. I mean, like, take him putting the military in the U.S. streets to go after illegal immigrants. Oh, I believe he'll put the military in the streets, all right, but it's not just going to be going after immigrants. It's going to create a military dictatorship and a culture of fear where none of us are fucking safe. And so this is obviously going from bad to worse. The idea that we're going to hand this guy the United States government in the psychological state he's in is literally maybe one of the last decisions we'll make collectively as United States citizens on a federal level. But I mean, this is all just utterly ridiculous. We have entered like into the absurd horror movie that's going to be playing for the next 4 years at least, called Donald Trump Episode 2. When we think of politics and political decisions, that kind of like gaslighting slogan, facts over feelings, kind of comes into play. And we tend to think of these as like really well-informed, intentive decisions. But the reality is that people's political ideas are products of their conditioning and their feelings. And so, one way of looking at fascism is a from the people that gravitate towards it and prop it up as a political thing. It's usually populism, and it's usually like the logic of colonization turned inward, where marginalized people and subpopulations within a colonial culture are turned on by the traditional or conservative elements in their culture that see change happening too fast or see the marginalized people gaining too much power. And so they turn to a strongman leader to preserve the status quo. I mean, in this case, it's pretty obvious. They'd rather have a white dictator than ever suffer through another time to having a black president. And so what's happening is we have the two Americas coming into, conflict with one another and them taking over the government. And so it's going to be bad for all of us. But this is actually about our kind of collective psychology and the way that kind of the colonial mindset turns in on itself and ends up eating itself in the form of fascism. The cartels exist and have all this money because of two things: the American public's insatiable lust for drugs, and American drug policy that ignores this fact, right? And so Americans' insatiable lust for drugs is actually a product of America's like widespread pandemic of unchecked trauma. Somebody asked me about my feelings on addiction earlier this day. I think addiction is rooted in trauma. It's not actually rooted in the substances themselves, but in the mind and body consuming the substances. And that if you really look, that the addiction is a lack of connection to self, or it's rooted in trauma, the trauma that makes this moment unsafe, and therefore we have to get out of this moment by dissociating into sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever. And eventually the dissociative vehicle becomes the problem itself through the lens of addiction. But the idea that like they're going to invade Mexico and somehow like cure America's drug addiction problems while they're yanking everybody off healthcare, it's utterly ridiculous. So we're going to make America healthy again by eating McDonald's and taking away everybody's healthcare, and also taking the fluoride out of water will do it. Everything they're doing is to destroy America. These are all narcissists. People are calling it all these different names. We are now a country ruled by pathological narcissists. People will say, oh, all politicians are narcissists. No, they're all heavy in narcissistic traits, but they are not all pathological narcissists. Not all of them storm the Capitol when they lose an election. And so, yeah, America's going to punish Mexico for capitalism, basically, for creating the illicit market around drugs so they could put non-white people in jail, in the process creating the perfect product. Right? It's all about supply and demand, baby. And if they go after the cartels in Mexico, the cartels will pop up somewhere else because somebody's going to sell us our fucking drugs and we're never going to stop wanting them. It's literally a failure of American foreign policy and the American healthcare system that has led to the dominance and the economic supremacy of the cartels.